All right, fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for joining for the extended Q&A here. Once again, as a reminder, this session is being recorded. And so as we move forward, we'll start up with some of the questions that were from the main segment. And if there's anyone who had asked some of these questions, or if there's any follow-up, feel free to turn on your video, say hi, and we can also get into additional Q&A as well, whether or not you want to speak up or put it in the chat box. So I'll start with a fun question that was handed to us before the main event. So this one's for Phil directly. How did you transition from being a WashU student to helping drive WashU's sustainability efforts? I mean, it's incredible the amount of work that went into the East End on this topic. So tell us a little bit about your journey there.
It's an interesting question. So whoever posed it, thanks. I had a reasonable gap between being a student and coming back to the university, and I think that helped a lot. In that time, I had a pretty nonlinear path. So I did some climate change research for a little while, and then became very interested in city issues. So basically how we build, design, finance city work. Worked for a bike ped nonprofit for a while, which I think certainly, as we talked about, applies to the work of the university. And then on the side, started an arts nonprofit. So it was not exactly linear, but sustainability has always been my passion and core. And I think I was picking up skills and knowledge along the way that lended themselves to doing this work pretty well, I think.
Well, Jane and Jamie are not saying anything to that, so I assume that's right. So I know this was something that was in our chat box, and Jamie, you'd responded to this as far as the different firms that were involved. In my background right now, we've got Olin Business School, unrelated, but MRY and Mackie Mitchell, local to St. Louis, worked on that project. And you'd mentioned them as well as others. Could you tell us the names of those firms and maybe which projects they had done there?
Sure. And what was somewhat unique, I think, about the way we organized this is we started with the landscape architect. We didn't, as I mentioned that, but that also applied to how we hired the design team. We started with the landscape architect, Michael Ferguson, landscape architect, who had done a lot of work at Johns Hopkins, for instance, and other historic sites and historic campuses, Monticello, and interviewed a range of, a big part of my job is thinking about who's the right professional firm with whom to partner on projects, and had a long list and a short list, narrowed it down to 2 firms, traveled the country, looked at their work and met at their office, and ended up selecting Michael Ferguson's firm, starting with the landscape architecture, infrastructure, and framework. Then we started a process of architect selection, and started really with Weil Hall, and there's nothing like hiring an architect for a school of architecture. So that was a pretty interesting, engaged process, and lots of ideas. I think we had over 80 architects that architecture faculty and others suggested we consider. Did a lot of vetting of all of those firms, from around the world, vetting. Had a short list, a shorter list, narrowed it down to 3 architects, ultimately hired Kieran Timberlake from Philadelphia, who had done a range of academic work, but also civic work. And this is sort of at the juncture between Civic Park and architectural school. They had done a design for an architecture building at Tulane, for instance, an art school at Yale, and really brought, so Kieran Timberlake brought both the sort of research-based focus on sustainability and how they would approach the design, but also the ability to work stylistically within this very complicated context of the Maquis buildings, the neoclassical buildings, and the collegiate Gothic buildings. That then sort of cascaded to be, well, we have these 2 pavilions and they touch the garage, and we saw work that Kieran Timberlake had done in Philadelphia, flanking the City Hall in Philadelphia, and really got the notion of, well, let's add on the pavilions to Kieran Timberlake's scope of work, because of, I'm seeing Jane's background there. Very much the way the glassy pavilions flank the historic symmetrical building is what they did for the entrance to the subway in Philadelphia. So we were visiting Philadelphia, and members of the board of trustees and others just said, well, why don't we just hire them to help us think about both Weil Hall and the pavilions. Then the garage, I should have mentioned BNIM, a firm in Kansas City, had done a lot of the early studies of the garage, and they were really the lead designers of the art of the garage. And I should have mentioned those in my chat, them in my chat. So they worked with Kieran Timberlake and with the other architects and landscape architects on the garage, and really wanting the garage to be a positive experience, as I mentioned before. Jubal Hall was Ruby Udell, who not only, as Advocate said, had done the Knight and Bauer Halls in his screensaver, but also Hillman Hall for social work and public health, and really had a really deep and passionate knowledge of our campus, of the history of our campus, but also how to create buildings that look forward, and sort of played that line between looking backward and looking forward. They've done so well on 2 buildings, and were able to do it as well for Jubal Hall. And then, as I say, McKelvey Hall came a year later, did the same sort of architect selection process there, and selected Perkins Eastman, a firm, their New York office. Some of the members of that team had worked for the firm that had done the architectural design of both Brower Hall and Green Hall. So they brought that knowledge to the sort of architectural expression of the buildings, but also had done a lot of computer science workplace design. So brought that combination of a contemporary workspace for computer science with this historic context challenge that we had. So I think those are the key members. We had local architects that Mackie Mitchell included, Arbalope for the landscape architecture in terms of local representation, a whole set of local partners, the engineering teams that worked. I mean, there must have been 30 consultants working on different parts of this project. Tao and Lee, also a local firm that was a local representative architect for some of the buildings as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, Jamie, for getting to the deep dive on that. What's really interesting, you know, I love the way you talk about that and the way that it was approached, because a lot of times when you are thinking about something of this scale with this many subdivided parcels and buildings, you know, sometimes you lose sight of the whole, right? To think about, okay, let's start with the landscape, let's start with the urban form, what's going on here, and then working towards those details, I think is really fantastic, and you know, explains a lot about why the project has been so successful. So really appreciate that. And as you can tell, just even based on the amount of names mentioned, huge effort among so many different companies and things driving together. So I'm sure that was fun for the WashU team to have to coordinate with all those folks too.
Fun is one, it was usually fun. There were moments where there was some diplomacy and negotiation, but it was 98% fun. Yeah.
Hey, that's better than most construction projects. So you know what? I'll take that as a win right there. So moving into some a process related question, were there any involvement opportunities for students during the planning, design, and construction phases, or any ways that there was more interfacing with how students would, you know, either be involved, either directly, adjacently, opportunities for them to feel part of it, even though it's, you know, taking up such a large part of a beloved part of campus?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So throughout the project on Fridays, we did tours of the construction site for visitors who had a mission-driven related reason to be there. And a large number of those visitors were students from Sam Fox and some from the McKelvey School. Particularly the students in Sam Fox, the ones in Givens, their studios, you know, overlooked the construction of their the new studio building. So we had hundreds of students come through the site and tried to tie it to what they were discussing in the classroom and in their studios, and tried to find either someone from the design team that was there on site that week to talk to them, or someone from the general contractor. It was interesting to see some of the same faces semester after semester, and talking about the way the project had changed, and they had a lot of, you know, great questions. And I even heard at one point that students had begun writing signs and putting them in the windows of Givens, asking the construction workers what they were doing, and they would respond back with, you know, something about what was happening. So it was a really special time in that sense, that if you really are interested in architecture and design, and engineering that it was like a living laboratory outside of your door for 2 years. And we hoped that by giving the students access to the site in that way, that it was a benefit instead of something that was annoying and that you had to walk around or took away your parking or was loud and dusty. So that was something that ran throughout the project.
I'll also add in that specifically for the solar elements of the project, we had some of our student interns intimately involved with every step of the process. So I had a student, an engineering student, do scoping layouts to figure out roughly how much could we fit onto these buildings. That was the first step. And then I had students work with me on actually developing an RFP to go out to bid. So we try to get our students actually really deeply integrated into our work. And they different groups of students, because the project, spanned quite a bit of time, were able to kind of track along and support us in moving the solar elements forward, both for the buildings in the East End as well as that North Campus site.
Fantastic. I know as a former Sam Fox graduate, I wish, I'm really jealous of those students getting those opportunities, and what a great way to turn something that could be seen as a hindrance into an asset. What a great learning situation there, and to get the exposure to a real life construction site of that scale. So that's absolutely fantastic. And to have it be cross-disciplinary and have so many different folks involved. Okay, so here we're going to jump to something, maybe this is probably a pretty easy question, but an unusual one. Is it possible to buy a chunk of the Brookings oak for a WashU related craft project?
Potentially, we should talk. We should talk. So whoever posed that question, please maybe drop your email in the chat, and I'm happy to reach out to you.
Very cool. That's great to know. And I think that was Jerry here in Colorado. So we'll make sure he reaches out. All right. So jumping over to another question, we've got, are there any operable windows in the pavilions, Weil Hall, or Kemper?
There are not. I should say, and Phil, please build on that, but there are not. But what there is a great connection to the exterior. And there are lots of reasons why there are not, having to do with humidity and the mechanical systems and the performance of the buildings. But the use of the outdoor spaces and the furniture and transparency and creation of multiple scales of spaces really encourages a use of all of the outdoor spaces, frankly, in a way that we don't always do such a good job of when we do projects on the hilltop. So I would say that a very, very deep acknowledgement of the importance of the inside-outside connectivity, but in terms of mechanical systems and bringing outside air in and outside humidity in, there really were some significant challenges in being able to do that for these buildings.
Yeah, one of the energy efficiency strategies, the mechanical systems Jamie mentioned, is a combination. Some buildings have chilled beam, some have radiant slab, and there is definitely a need to keep the controls pretty tight. So it is a downside, but as I think we mentioned earlier through the presentation, the landscape in the building fits together in such a beautiful way that the landscape is not all that far away. So it's easy for people to get out into those restorative spaces, but the buildings themselves are pretty restorative too.
And I should have mentioned the makerspace in Jubal has large openings so that large pieces of things that are being made can move in and out. And Weil Hall has large openings that, again, to their outdoor makerspace, almost like a garage door type sliding opportunity to bring inside and outside together. Now that isn't so great in terms of air leakage between the inside and outside, but we do have those opportunities on appropriate days, appropriate weather, appropriate humidity to really open up for the students' use inside and outside at the ground floor.
Oh, that's fantastic. And also, even thinking about all the work that had to go into achieving those LEED certifications, right? The fact you were targeting gold and attained platinum, there has to be so much thought given into that. So, and how those systems work and keeping that envelope tight. So that makes a lot of sense. So thank you for the response on that. So moving on to the next question, we see the master plan, we see how all of that, we see those overhead aerial views. And so there's a question that came in saying, are there any plans or room for more buildings on this site?
There are. There are 2 sites on the engineering in the McKelvey School of Engineering for significant projects both above ground and below ground. We have all of the engineering buildings are interconnected at their lower level, at their basement level. And there's an opportunity to sort of fill in the middle of the quad that I showed with the drone view, to fill in underground. And there's plenty of engineering programming that would benefit from no light and being on the ground, being in the basement with vibration being minimal relative to above. So we have quite a capacity left in the McKelvey School of Engineering central area. And there's one really challenging but amazing opportunity site right on Skinker, right to the east of the Kemper Art Museum, that really, sitting here today, we have no notion what programmatically that wants to be, but it's a really important site that we're going to think really hard about once ideas start to emerge as to how we use that site. But to be honest, those 3 sites are what we have left at the East End. And I mean, this is a bigger challenge we have. Danforth campus doesn't have that many sites remaining. So this is a real moment in time where we have to be very, very careful and very cautious about how we use the sites we have. Now, some of them are used for surface parking, and that comes with it challenges of replacing it or reducing the amount of parking. But to maintain our open space, both at the East End and at the Hilltop, which really gives our campus its character that's beloved by everyone, we want to be careful to not build buildings that really take away from the quality of our open space and interconnected open space.
Fantastic. We've got multiple questions regarding parking. Would you believe it? So we'll
That's
start.
Jane's department. Yeah.
All right.
How many questions did you answer about parking? Yeah.
So I think these will be relatively quick, but I do want to cover them all together. So first question, what does it feel like safety-wise underground at night? I know that's a serious consideration for students and faculty and staff.
So the garage has, and I wish now in hindsight we had included a photo of it in the actual parking spaces in our presentation. The height of the garage of the ceiling is very, very generous. It's probably one of the more generous parking garages in North America, as it follows the slope of the Brookings Hill from the east to the west. So at the far end of the garage, the ceiling height is probably close to 20 feet. And it is a lot of, it's very bright, well lit, and very open, despite the fact that you are underground. So how it feels at night is not much different than how it feels during the day. There are also lots of WashU PD blue lights as well stationed throughout the garage. And the campus circulator runs through the garage and turns around before it restarts its route. And there's also pedestrian connection between Weil and Jubal, and you can also access the pavilions as well. So it serves more purpose than just parking, as really as a connective framework underground as well.
Fantastic. I know we've already answered the question regarding the parking space reduction overall compared to the surface lots. Are there recharging stations for electrical vehicles? Does campus have electrical vehicle charging stations?
Yes, we do have a number of EV charging stations in the East End garage, and we have the ability to add more over time as the demand increases. We also have EV charging stations elsewhere in other parking garages and surface lots as well.
Great. And was it ever considered to remove the parking lots altogether and not replace it at all?
It was, there are agreements with the county that require us to have a certain number of parking spaces. That's one piece of it. The other piece is really the convenience of the folks that work at this end of the campus. So The answer to that is probably not. I mean, I think we wish maybe that could have been, but we really saw it as the infrastructure required for this part of the campus to make possible adding the buildings and supporting the buildings that are in that precinct.
I saw in the chat, either in this before was what are the challenges of the project? And I would say the loss of parking from my perspective during the project. Jamie teasingly said parking is my question, or my questions. And I'm pretty sure that the significant number of people that I met when I first joined thought I worked for parking and transportation, because basically every question was about the loss of parking, when the parking would be coming back, or just a general, my parking space is now so terrible. So it really, parking was the like rallying point of people who were inconvenienced by the project.
It comes up more often than you'd like to think in construction. And, admittedly, right, being an underground lot, being covered in inclement weather, having direct connections to the buildings, there's just so many things about how it's integral. And I know Jamie had mentioned, or at least maybe I read about this online, the way the heights, those airy heights contribute to potential flexibility in the future.
That's right. I mean, the flat floors and the heights give us the ability, maybe over time, our parking demand and the requirements that are put on us to create this number of spaces may diminish. And if that's the case, we have the ability to adaptively reuse this garage, portions of the garage, for classrooms, auditoria, laboratories, gathering spaces, meeting rooms, that we built in that extra height to allow us to do that in the future. And you're starting to see projects around the world that do just that. So I think that was very wise of us to do, of our trustees and our leadership, to support making that investment for something that may not happen for quite a number of decades.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's really future forward. And that was a really cool fun fact when I'd heard about it. Okay, so moving on to something a little bit with sustainability and the large swaths of grass. There's a question about how do you make large swaths of grass like you see in the images sustainable with maintenance, pesticides, fertilizer, irrigation? What are maybe some ways that challenge has been met?
Well, it's a really good question. And I think at the core, turf is a higher resource intensive use of space than natural landscapes. So there are a number of things that we do to try to reduce the impact. We work really closely with our lawn care provider, the type of equipment they use, the type of inputs they put on the land. But the bigger story for WashU is we're chipping away at turf. Even with the addition of the East End, in 2010, turf was about 75% of our open space, or of our green space. And in 2020, turf is only 67%. And that's with all the addition of the turf on the East End. So the turf is, it is part of the campus environment, in that these are spaces where if you go out on a sunny day, you're going to have lots of students sitting in the grass, throwing Frisbees. And then if you come on ceremonial days like commencement, the turf ends up actually being really important for hosting those spaces. So we have, over the years, we've been chipping away at the edges, and I think we'll probably continue to do so to minimize the amount of turf overall, and then continuing to work with our landscape provider to reduce the actual inputs into the turf. The cistern on the East End does help with the water side of that story, since that water is percolating down onto a garage, and then some of it will invariably run off. The cistern is capturing any of that excess water. So it's basically, twice through or multiple times through. Jamie, would you add anything?
All right. Moving back to the buildings. So we got a question that's a little bit in detail. So someone who's on the call right now watched a lecture given by Stephen Kieran at Carnegie Mellon, including a project that they're collaborating with on their campus. It seems Kieran Timberlake places great importance on material research. There have been quite a few envelope mock-ups out near Skinker during construction. And this person wondered how it was working with them throughout the material selection process, and also in regards to considerations for daylight and energy performance using the amount of glazing they did on their project.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, I mean, they're a data-driven design firm, and the analysis that they went through to address this conundrum of glass buildings in today's environment in St. Louis was very successful. You see the pavilions, and we can think they're glass, but every other 4-foot bay is actually not, it is a shadow box. So the amount, they appear like they're glass pavilions, but actually every other, generally, I mean, there's some parts of the building that are more completely open, but in general, every other, the percentage of the open area of the facade of the envelope versus the transparent versus translucent. Same thing at Weil Hall. In Weil Hall, if you really look at the north, south, east, and west facades, there's exactly sort of a percentage embodiment of what that facade calls for given its solar orientation, with vertical fins, opaque glass, frosted glass, and clear glass. There's also a whole vocabulary of frit, of ceramic frit, that's been added to the glass layer that really cuts down the solar heat gain, but also adds a decorative element to the exterior of the pavilions in particular. So I think they were, as I say, extremely successful in not having a building that felt like a masonry wall with windows in it, but rather it's a curtain wall building that is somewhat consistent in its facade, but when you really start to look at it, you can see that all of the moves in the facade really are very much derived from the research and analysis and modeling that they did based on this particular site and context.
Fantastic. Well, no, thanks for going through that. And it's great to learn about the process that you all went through with Kieran Timberlake for that. Related to it, and I don't know if this is an answer you'd have offhand, what is the energy usage of the new buildings in kilo-British thermal units per square foot per year? Or has there been time to even gather this type of data in full?
Yes, we have both the designed as well as the actual, but I don't know off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I'd be happy to follow up with whoever posed the question.
No, it sounds good. Thank you so much, Phil. Appreciate that. Okay, we've got 2 more before we are going to hit our time. So next question, was the dining facility designed to meet previously unmet and expanding dining needs of the East Campus, supplementing already existing dining facilities throughout campus? Are services of other food facilities equivalent to those in the East Campus Pavilion? I'm not familiar with this, so hopefully the question makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we really looked at the whole campus and the variety of food and worked very closely with dining services and how they think about food as it's distributed throughout the campus, and almost neighborhoods of where are the different, what time of day and what type of menu is appropriate and necessary to support and bring activity and community to that part of the campus. So a lot of that thinking went into how, where's the closest place for lunch? What are its hours? What is its menu? But on the other hand, also what's unique about Parkside Cafe, and what can celebrate some of the traditions and WashU specific items, or St. Louis specific way, Ted Drew's ice cream, Ted Drew's custard, for instance. How can we serve things that will be memorable? And we also remember we were serving admissions visitors and their families. So maybe when the prospective student goes on the tour, we wanted to create a place that would highlight and feature toasted ravioli and Ted Drew's and things that are really St. Louis based, that would give the family members or the prospective students a little window to the cuisine, for better or worse, of St. Louis. So it really wanted to have a unique quality in the Parkside and have things made in a sustainable way, have things made to order, had things customizable, have things that you can order on a tablet. It's sort of, it's innovative in use of technology for ordering and the processing of how you are ordering on your phone and picking up. Who would have thought that how much a part of our lives that would become? But it really was an opportunity to pilot some real technology advancements also in how we serve food on campus.
Oh, that's fantastic. You're making me miss Ted Drew's and T-Raps from 1,000 miles away. So I think we're getting to the end here. So we're gonna have one more question and then one more comment. So the change as one goes from west to east is inspirational. Is there any initiative to provide a virtual tour from the quad to Skinker?
Well, Jane, I think given your future of being a drone pilot, I think you are going to help create that imagery.
Yes, so facilities planning and management has started a drone program for some very operational things like thermal scans and roof inspections, but we also have the opportunity to grow our in-house capabilities for promotional video and communications about the Danforth campus and the work that we do. So I had kind of thought that that's what I would be working on, you know, with the end of the East End, and then with the pandemic, I've been working on other things for the last year. So as we kind of think about the way forward, I think that there will be more ways to tap into what's happening on the Danforth campus from afar in the future.
Fantastic. Well, no, we're looking forward to that, and hopefully someone didn't just make a bunch of new work for you inadvertently. So before we finish up here, we're hitting just past 5:30. Thank you everyone for being here, our fantastic speakers. Thank you for fielding all these questions. They're a bit more technical in nature. And thanks to everyone who is still listening in. It seems like we have about 30 folks still here. For those that want to stick around for extended networking without our speakers, just more WashU alumni who want to network are welcome to stay on, and I'll stay on as well. And I wanted to share a comment that was put in our chat box. It says, this is a really great way for alumni from around the country to get a sense of the campus today. As a former and hopefully future alumni interviewer of prospective WashU students, it's really interesting to see the place itself, including interior spaces. We'd like to see more programs about like this, about how other parts of campus have changed and continue to change over time. You know, it's a really great way, it sounds like, for alumni to connect to the universities still from across the country. And I remember in the main chat, we had seen folks from coast to coast all over the country. So really fantastic. Thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. James, Jane, and Phil, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. And Mary Ray, I know you're on the line here. If we want to get, if there's anyone who'd like to stay on for extended WashU networking, of course, we'll stick around.
Great. Yeah. If you're still with us and you want to just chat for a few more minutes, feel free to turn on your camera.
Hey,
Hey.
Vik, how's it going? Ian Cook here. No, we
Hey.
had, yeah, you'd been in school when I was in school, I think, there, so in the architecture program. Good to see you.
Yeah, man, it's great to see you. How are you, Ian?
Not too bad. Where are you out West Coast?
Out in Denver. So
Okay.
in Colorado these days.
Yep, neat.